You may have already seen the headlines. The movie mogul Harvey Weinstein's trial is getting underway. His alleged sex crimes, the touchstone for the MeToo movement. But more than 2 years on, has the campaign achieved any real changes? You're watching Roundtable. Hello and welcome to the programme from me, David Foster. When two women came forward to say that they had been abused by the top film producer Harvey Weinstein, it started a tide of protest. Countless women coming forward to say, me too, I've been preyed upon by a man in a position of authority. Weinstein denies the charges, but the global Me Too campaign continues.
In October 2017, the New York Times published a story detailing decades of allegations of sexual harassment against media mogul Harvey Weinstein. The revelations about Weinstein's alleged misconduct towards actresses and other women in the film industry led to the MeToo hashtag going viral online. Last December, Weinstein reached a tentative $25 million deal with his former company and dozens of alleged victims. But the rape trial against him has begun in New York, and now he faces new charges in Los Angeles. It was back in 2006 when activist Tarana Burke launched the Me Too campaign to support sexual harassment survivors and end sexual violence. She says her goal was to spread a message for survivors: you're heard, you're understood. The campaign has led to a legal fund worth millions of dollars, with nearly 800 volunteer lawyers providing legal advice for sexual violence victims. The Me Too campaign has made headlines, but is it making a real difference in the lives of women and men around the world?
Very pleased to say that joining me at the round table we have Aude Konan, a writer who's working on a short film called Me Too. Ceri Widett is here, a barrister specialising in equality law. And on the line from New York City, the US actor Zoe Stuckless, who confronted Harvey Weinstein at a party. The video went viral. And in Wisconsin, Jennifer Fink, founder of BuildingBoys, a website about how best to raise boys and young men. So much to talk about. Thank you very much indeed. Zoe, let's go to you first of all. I want you to tell me about the atmosphere in this club that you went to where Weinstein was before you confronted him. You were quite shocked. You said it was one of the most surreal nights of your life.
Yeah, so about 3.5 months ago, I was invited to go to an event on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, specifically for emerging actors. So this was a space for new work, for artists that didn't have a large platform, for people to share their creativity in an open community of their peers. So I went with a friend. I got in kind of early, sat down, and about 15 minutes or so, half an hour into my being there, I noticed an older man who had come in, and at first none of us realized that it was Harvey Weinstein, but as we looked over, it sort of became more and more apparent. So it didn't really become perfectly clear until the show had begun. There was a comic who went up and she addressed the elephant in the room. And immediately there was a chorus of boos. A lot of people, I'm sure, have seen the video. But I was standing in the center of the room, about 4 feet from Weinstein's table. And I looked around and I saw that the people who were booing, it wasn't just like an isolated part of the crowd. It was the MC. It was all of the event organizers. It was the bartenders. These are all people...
And they were booing not the fact that Weinstein was there, Zoe, but the fact that somebody was actually saying he shouldn't be here. So they were supporting him ostensibly. Let's take a look at the time when you then went up to his table.
No, nobody's gonna say anything. Nobody's really gonna say anything. I'll get out of here, that's fine. I am happy to leave, but nobody's gonna say anything.
And Zoe, you did go at that point, I think partly escorted out by the people who were looking after him. Why do you think nobody in a room full of aspiring young actors and writers, people who might have been typical Weinstein targets, if you like, why do you think nobody stood up and said, you don't belong here, get out?
I think that it's impossible to overstate how much pressure you can feel from a crowd. I think that it's how Weinstein was able to get away with his crimes to begin with, is the fact that you don't want to be the one, particularly in a space for artists without large platforms, to stand up and rock the boat in a space when you're surrounded by people with many more industry connections, much more opportunity. It is terrifying, and it feels dangerous, both to yourself and to the art that you want to make. I know that in the room, I know that there were other people who felt the same way, but there was this palpable silence.
You see, Zoe, we'll come back and get more thoughts in just a moment, but Aude, you've been trying to make this film for a couple of years now. It's just a financial matter, and you experienced harassment as well. But the fact is that what Zoe saw there is a demonstration that very little has changed, perhaps.
Yeah, pretty much. When you look at Weinstein and all the other powerful men who have been accused of sexual harassment and sexual assault, not much has happened to them unfortunately, since MeToo. In terms of trial, in terms of compensation for the victims, there was that whole movement and everyone was talking about it. But 1 or 2 years down the line, it really seems like people don't really care about it, and the potential perpetrators, when I mean potential, people who have been accused of being perpetrators haven't really felt much negative
clearly
impact.
He feels no shame if he's sitting there, lapping it all up, etc., etc. But when I say nothing perhaps has changed, do you think it's because it had a wave of popularity and everybody was sort of saying, yes, 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 me too, me too, me too, and suddenly it's no longer in the spotlight? Or have we seen some incremental changes that might lead to a better future for those people on the end of all this?
Well, I feel like the main change is that nowadays we can talk about issues surrounding sexual crimes and sexual assault, which wasn't necessarily the case a few years ago. Victims feel like survivors, do feel like they might be able to talk about it. But when it comes to the change, outside of it, I really don't think there's much change, especially in an entertainment industry where so many people start so young, are being preyed upon by much older people.
Yeah. And it appears that they're quite prepared to be compliant, if you like, rather than willing participants, but be compliant if it gets them where they want to go. Would you say that's unfair of me to say that?
Yes, I would say.
Zoe was saying, there's a room full of people there who are all keeping quiet because they're worried about their future careers.
The thing when it comes to sexual crimes is that power is the most important thing.
Ceri, I'll come to you in a moment, but I want to bring in a mum of 4 boys, Jennifer here. And the point's been made twice that it's about a feeling of power and how helpless and hopeless people who are subjugated can feel in these situations. Do you think, with all the women you've spoken to, all the mums, dads, parents and boys, that a message is getting through that power is not something to be savoured if you happen to be a man? It's not going to get you as far as it used to.
I do think that message is getting through. To me, it's interesting to hear that perspective that the Me Too movement maybe hasn't accomplished that much yet, because what I see is that it has really filtered down and parents are thinking incredibly hard about, how do I raise good men? How do I raise men who will not treat other people in this way? It is a topic that is on our minds all the time. It may not change what Harvey Weinstein and others do in the rest of their lives, but there is change afoot.
What sort of change?
Parents are thinking a lot about the messages that boys receive. We don't want our children to grow up thinking that they have power simply by being male, or that it is okay to trade your power and use that to get other people to do things that benefit you. That's what we're trying to fight against, and we're grappling with how to do that.
And are you talking simply about in male-female situations, or are you saying that men should not use their power in male-male situations because that's taking advantage of somebody? It's not just a binary gender thing.
I do think that. Obviously, we're never going to eliminate the fact that power is an influence in relationships between countries in the world. Power is a dynamic. But we, as parents, are trying to help our children be thoughtful about power and not take power for granted and not necessarily only use power for self-advantage.
Okay, nice idea. When somebody with power uses that against you and you've decided not to, it might be a different dynamic. I'll come back to you on that, if I may, Jennifer. And you've been nodding, Ceri, at a lot of this.
I think power is absolutely the key in terms of that dynamic. But what we're seeing in the UK is not an increase in the number of claims coming before the Employment Tribunal, but actually a decrease in claims.
Well, maybe that means that not many men are doing it anymore.
Well,
They've listened to Jennifer's message.
Possible one explanation, yeah, but the statistics don't bear that out. The studies, there aren't any governmental studies, that's one of the absences in this country, about the level of sexual harassment within the workplace. So they're piecemeal studies, but they show between 50% roughly and 60% of women are suffering from sexual harassment, but 80% of women say nothing about it. Another statistic that's interesting is last year, or 2017, the Equality and Human Rights Commission identified only 8 cases going to the Employment Tribunal that were successful in 2017 in relation to sexual harassment. So the figures are very low.
Is that because people are frightened to take it any further, or because the law is a bit of an ass?
A bit of both. People are frightened about the loss of their career. The studies show that they're also embarrassed. They think they may be blamed. They are frightened that they will fall out with their colleagues. In terms of employment tribunal claims, we've got a 3-month time limit, which is another hurdle.
So if you don't book it in before that 3 months is up, you've lost the chance.
Potentially
and you're a bit nervous about doing it, so...
Yeah, and one of the things we know is that women don't openly talk about it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the law is failing workers who are suffering sexual harassment.
The pressures of reporting these sort of things, or putting your head above the parapet, and I'm going to go to Zoe again now. Please, any one of you, say whatever you wanted at any particular time. But Zoe, there we saw you confronting a man accused of these crimes. Of course, he says he did nothing wrong. But there we saw you upping your public profile, if you like. Not that I'm sure you did it for that reason, but it has done, undoubtedly. Has that in any way backfired because of the power that people have, and they identify you with somebody who's confronting a powerful person?
Yes, to some degree. So I've certainly received some threatening or negative messages, but for the most part, it's been largely online. And the response has been quite positive, particularly with people reaching out to me directly with their own stories of sexual violence and sexual abuse that they have survived, and finding solidarity. And also I've worked speaking to various people looking for organizations that can help folks that reach out directly to me, so that I can try to refer to them to somebody that can help them either legally or financially to seek justice in their individual situations.
These were people who presumably hadn't told their story before, or had told their story and hadn't been listened to. Again, that says something about how little advancement that perhaps has been made, that they weren't able to do it until they saw you being courageous, if you like.
Right. When we're able to speak up, when one person is able to speak up, it gives others courage to do the same. It's how we saw the MeToo movement gain traction to begin with. It was something that was happening mostly on Twitter and on Facebook, and it was, at least in my experience, it was my colleagues, my peers, the people that I respected and admired. And prior to that, these conversations weren't really happening publicly. And so I know that I felt unbelievably alone and ashamed. And so even if objectively, we know and we understand that it's not our fault, it's certainly something that I felt. And so to see people that I respected coming forward, it gave me the courage to do the same. And so the fact that my actions in that bar, which was just, like a night out with my friend.
Yeah, well, I sort of get this, but I'm coming back to, it's a bit of a circular argument, isn't it? I'm saying if it took you, one person, to stand up to bring other people out to say what was wrong with the system, and 2 years ago we had an absolute clamour, and yet these sort of appearances by people like Weinstein still occur. And I don't want to make it too much of a circular argument, but what has changed?
Very little, I think, very little. One of the problems is that, and there is research that shows that after you've made a complaint, about 70% of workers say, in fact, nothing's changed. And 16% of workers say, in fact, the situation's worse. I've complained about it, now in a worse position. We're just not dealing with it. We're not talking about it. Effectively, we're being silenced, or women and men are being silenced, because men too can be sexually harassed. But by far, the perpetrators tend to be by large men.
OK, Aude, I want to ask you your thoughts on this. And then, Jennifer, I want to come to you and see if we can get some lessons for mankind, boykind, that you think will help reduce the level of abuse, if you like, and subjugation out there. So, Aude, you first, yeah?
The shame of speaking out is very strong because...
Why is it shameful?
Well, it is shameful because that's not the kind of things that you will admit easily. When it comes to sexual assault and sex crimes, these are topics that are taboo and make people uncomfortable. They'll rather change the conversation and not talk about it because it says a lot about society, who has power, how it is used against people, and also about sex and the way it is used as, I guess...
But didn't that all change 2 years ago when,
you
know, it was me too, me. Suddenly women were not frightened of coming forward.
It's a very tricky issue because people have been talking about it, but then it has been buried simply because, well, first of all, there are plenty of people who are in position of power, and also because simply it's an uncomfortable
well, today's
subject.
headlines, tomorrow's fish and chip paper, you know, the whole thing, it made the front pages wherever, and now it's just gone away. Jennifer, lessons for mankind in the gender-based sense. How do you teach people not to want to take on power, if you like, and use it to their own advantage?
You know, I think it's important to note that change takes a long time. The fact that we're talking about something that happened 2 years ago and we're saying that there hasn't been noteworthy change is normal. Throughout human history, men predominantly have had power and have often used that power over others, often women. So we are trying to change generations of human interaction and generations of learning and what we learned growing up. So today's parents who grew up in the same system, many of us, as the system that produced Harvey Weinstein and these other men, are trying to figure out what we should do differently with our children.
OK, I'm going to read to you a couple of things that you said to my producer. A boy who feels shame about being male is more, not less likely, to lash out at others, particularly females. Was this not one of the consequences, perhaps, of the Me Too Time's Up campaign, that it made some men who were entirely innocent feel that they should be ashamed of being men?
Yes, and I think it has been an unintended consequence. So many people, a lot of us here today, I'm sure saw the "not all men" hashtag on Twitter and online. And there are a lot of good men who are saying, hey, I never did this. And we as women can point out ways in which perhaps their silence has enabled some of this, in ways in which they do things that have been harmful to women. What happens with women and men talking, those conversations are really important. I think we also need to remember that there are little boys who are hearing this messaging, who are hearing about all these bad men, their stories day after day after day. They hear the terms toxic masculinity being tossed around. And I understand that that term is meant to refer to a very specific way of expressing behavior that has often been associated with
OK,
men.
well, in my opinion, if it is toxic masculinity, it doesn't deserve to be called masculine. Zoe, you were looking sort of quite shocked at some of the things you were saying, or just simply fascinated?
It's just interesting that you brought up the not all men hashtag, and you were talking about how like certainly regardless of whether or not people have committed sexual violence, that we culturally are complicit. So that meaning, I think that yes, all men are complicit in a culture of sexual violence, regardless of the best intentions, just as many women and other people are also complicit in those systems. And so I think that in order to create active change, there needs to be a forward effort at unlearning these toxic systems and working consciously to fight against them.
Which to some extent is what Jennifer is trying to do. And you did bring up something that I was going to mention. There was a famous quote that said, if we are not speaking up, we are complicit. You want to put this out on film.
Yeah.
It's been in incubation, let's put it that way, for a little while. But this is what, a 15-minute film of your personal experiences, or three different girls?
3 different girls.
Yeah.
Both experiences that I've had and my friends have had when we were growing up, because it was common practice to be harassed by much older men when we were teenagers or twins. And that was something that we saw as normal, actually. It was even like a badge of honor. You were seen as ugly if you were not being chatted up by older men, which is, when you think about it, very toxic, but we're very young. And we didn't have the tools or the words to talk about it. And, you know, when it comes to, I mean, the topic of men always come forward and how they can be better ally, how they can not be scared. Well, there's something about power where we always have to manage men's feelings, even when it's not about them. There's also another thing about them where it's like, if you're one of the good ones, why do you care so much about the others being called out? So I know that...
According to Zoe, all men are complicit.
All men are complicit, yeah, definitely. Because the good ones benefit from the bad ones, because then they can elevate themselves by saying, I'm not one of the bad ones, so I should...
Well, you can't win then, can you?
Well, that's the thing, though. Women and non-binary people can also not win, because they're literally, they're being oppressed. So the thing is, I would say, because plenty of people have asked me, and I've had plenty of men in my team as well, and the question is not so much how can you win, but how you can support perpetrators, including other men who've also been, obviously...
I know you want to say something, Ceri, but let me just throw this one out there. And I risk the opprobrium coming straight back at me. You, Ceri, first of all, is there such a thing as toxic femininity?
I think there probably is, yeah, in the same way of toxic masculinity. I'm not keen on the polarisation between men and women, and I think there's a backlash at the moment, and I think we have to be careful about saying everyone is, or all men are complicit in the system. I think women are equally complicit in a system that is perpetuating itself. That starts from a very early age. You know, we are seeing discrimination in schools, in primary schools, in secondary schools, and even more in universities. So these deeply entrenched behaviours start from a very early age. But the polarisation, I don't think, is a helpful argument. And I think at the moment we're seeing a backlash against MeToo, which we have to be very careful about. It doesn't take us off the course.
Yeah, I'm going to go to Jennifer. We only got a couple of minutes left. Zoe, thank you so much. Good luck in your career. Perhaps we'll have you on the programme in a year or two when you're topping the bill, either on Broadway or in Hollywood. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jennifer, if you had one thing to say to your boys as a life lesson when it comes to the subject we've been discussing, what would it be?
Respect other people. Listen to other people's experiences and believe them when they tell you how something affects them and how they're feeling. Respect other people.
And do you think they're listening?
I think they're listening, but I think that I am a voice, and they are also being surrounded by all these other voices in the media, in the music, on TV. It's going to take a lot of voices and a lot of time for this messaging to get through. We're making progress, but it will take time.
See, the trouble is, the moment you realise, perhaps, that power is an aphrodisiac to yourself, that it gets you where you want it to go, then you're not going to want to give it up. It takes a lifetime to teach people to respect and not abuse power, but the moment they've abused power, it's gone.
Yeah. And that's part of the challenge for parents and for everybody in the world today, because we can all look around and see examples of people who have done that, lived their lives that way, and are in very high positions.
Yeah, so much to change. And obviously, so much time is needed. Thank you very much indeed. Aude Konan,
Yeah.
and the film is called Me Too,
Yes.
and you need some money.
Yeah.
There is still a crowdfunding page, or is it
Yeah.
slightly dormant at the moment?
Yes, it is.
Okay, well, get in touch with Aude somehow if you want to do this. Zoe, thank you very much indeed. Appreciate you coming on, both of you from the United States. Jennifer, thank you. And Ceri, more people need to come forward in the workplace because they don't really quite understand what's going on.
They do.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you very much
thanks for having
indeed. Thank you to all of my guests for coming on this programme. 2 years after the Weinstein story first hit the headlines, how far have we come? From the team that helped put this programme together, from me, David Foster, Me Too. Goodbye.